Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I see some people from Colorado, the state of Colorado, so I'm going to have to change what I was going to say. Not really. Yeah, you're videoing it. Yeah, don't show the governor. Anyway, and Molly's here, so all of my peeps are here to tell on me and rat me out. But anyway, I wanted to talk today about delivering product in any environment, and what does that really mean? So if you see here all of these entities, basically I've worked for most of them in my career. So I wanted to give you a little bit of my background. Thank you, Molly, for that kind intro. And also just so I wanted to thank Thai Rockies and Molly for putting this on today, and Vic. So it's so great to be here, so thank you. But in my career, I started out at a company called Abacus, and it actually wound up being a very disruptive, innovative internet company. It was purchased by DoubleClick in 1999, I think. And so we were about a mid-sized company. We were very high growth. We disrupted the internet space, actually, at the time. We married online and offline data and made the FTC very mad. No, I'm not kidding. You can Google it. But it was a very high growth company, so very entrepreneurial, but still kind of became a mid-sized company. Then I left after about 12 years. I was a software engineer and eventually the senior technology person, and went to a company called PaySimple, which Molly talked about, and that was a startup, very high, intense, nimble, agile environment where we were trying to build software, and I'll tell a bunch of stories here in a little while. After that, I lost my mind and I went to the state of Colorado. That's where you all lost your minds, exactly. For about 2.5 years, and so I was the CTO for the state of Colorado. Huge company, a little bit slower than a startup, just a little bit. And I was there for about 2.5 years, and in all of this world, I was developing product and trying to get something out the door. And product can be anything, right? It can be a service, it can be a literal product, it can be something that you build like a SaaS solution or whatever. And then I joined IQNavigator, which is my current company, as the CTO about 1.5 years ago, and it's another mid-sized company. I'm also on the board of Cisco's customer experience. So if you know who Cisco is, I've been on their customer experience board for about 4 or 5 years, as the only woman, just so you know. It's great to see some women in here. And so that's a very large company. And then I was also, when I was the CTO for the state, I was on several nonprofit boards. So I understand the entities, and I understand a lot about what companies are trying to do. And it's interesting because there's a lot of commonality in all of them. And I'll tell you what that is. So what is in common? One, they all need people. Artificial intelligence has not gotten to a point where we don't need people anymore, which is good. And they all need to get something done. And you're thinking, my God, she's brilliant, right? This is what I came for, is to see that. But I've learned a lot about that, and if you think about it, everybody, whatever you're doing right now, everybody needs to get something done, and you need people to do it. I don't care if you're at a startup and you're here because you want to hear how to deliver a product in a startup. I don't care if you're here from the government and you want to hear how to deliver a product there. You've got to get something done, and you've got to get something out the door. So let's take needing people. So you've got to have people who are willing and able, and I know that you do know that I'm brilliant. People who are willing and people who are able, but that's very interesting because you don't always find people who are willing, and you definitely don't always find people who are able. And unless you have that, you're not going to really necessarily get any kind of product or service out the door, ever. And I know people say, it's the talent, or it's this or that. And I've found that there's really a bit of a trick to both of these. So let's take able first, because I think able is interesting. Able people have the ability to accomplish your mission. Now, I would say that kind of alludes to the fact that there's talent, that those people have talent. And I'll give you a story. That's not necessarily true. When I first joined IQNavigator, we weren't able to really produce product. It had been a maintenance organization for, I want to say, about 4 or 5 years. And when I first took over, I've been there about 1.5 years. I couldn't get product out the door. I couldn't figure out why. And they had been a maintenance organization. The development team had really been focused on just kind of day-to-day maintaining. I called it making the donuts. The product team was kind of the same way. I mean, they would take certain features and they wanted to just do like really small steps. And literally every release that we were having to build out product, we would miss like almost everything. And I couldn't figure out why. And I thought, I wonder if we just don't have talent. And that's kind of what Able alludes to, but it's not the same thing. So I talked to my VPs who had brought in, and I said, do we just not have talented Java developers? I mean, is there a problem here? What can we do? Do we need to bring in some senior people? And they said, no, we have a lot of talent here. And I said, well, what is the problem? Well, unbeknownst to me, these VPs went out and they hired a Java firm that could come in and actually test for Java skills. And they didn't tell me about it, and then they came to me with the results, and they said, we're above average for a Java shop. We actually have a lot of talent in our pool of Java developers. And I said, well, that just makes no sense to me. What's wrong? And what I found is that we had a focus and an execution problem. We had people who were able, talent-wise, but they weren't able to actually focus enough to get product out the door. So what I did really pissed them off. And I went to a consulting firm, and I brought them in, like about 12 people, and sat with my Java developers. My team is about 30, 35. And I sat them with my team for about 6 months. And I said, I want you guys to show these guys how to do critical thinking, how to focus, and how to execute. And in the meantime, and it actually made my Java developers very mad. And I don't know that I blame them. But I couldn't figure out how else to do it, because I talked to them, I had individual meetings with them, and I had a lot of meetings with groups and stuff, and I just couldn't get over that hump of what is it they're going to take to really make sure that this team can deliver. And so this consulting firm came in, and they sat with these guys for about 6 months, and we wound up standing up a brand new architecture for our company in about 9 months. And we actually just delivered it about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And the team was actually very mad at me, like, for a really long time. In fact, tomorrow we have a dunk tank coming in, and I'm going to let all the developers dunk me for however long they want to. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. And but that's kind of my punishment for doing what I did. But it basically wound up that they have swagger now. We actually were able to deliver in a timely fashion. In 9 months, we were able to deliver an entirely new software architecture. This team is amazing. They came together, and they have a lot of swagger now. I asked them the other day, I said, what do you think we can do? And they're like, we can do anything. And it's the same guys from a year and a half ago. So they were able, from a talent perspective, but they weren't able to do that critical thinking, and they weren't able to think like a startup, which is what everybody wants to be, right? We all want to be a startup. We all want to have that mentality. But you got to make sure, from the standpoint of the willing and able, that you have people who are able to do it. They're able to accomplish your mission. When I went to the state of Colorado, we took over the Medicaid system for a little while. We were struggling, and there were some issues with the Medicaid system. And I couldn't understand why, because we actually had a consulting firm, Deloitte, who we had about 80 developers, amazing developers. I mean, they were like super brilliant guys. But we couldn't actually deliver a product that worked either. And what I wound up, and I knew they were talented. I mean, there was no doubt about whether they were able or not. And I went to them and I said, why is it that we can't actually fix some of the problems that are kind of basic problems? And they said, you just never asked us. Let me say that again. And it was true. They were very able. We just had never really asked them. So it's the focus and execution, I think, is really one of the most important things that we can do when we're looking at the ability of our team to be able to deliver product in any environment. Doesn't matter which environment, because at some point you got to make sure that people can do it. And it doesn't mean that they're talented or not talented. The willing part is willing people believe in the cause. And I have found this over and over and over again in all of the entities that I'm with. As a startup, I mean, it's very obvious, right? I mean, there's a cause. You have a goal. You're gonna make it to the end game. You're gonna get a product out the door. You're gonna make millions of dollars. Everybody's gonna get wealthy and retire to Fiji. Government, not so much, right? I mean, in fact, I did thank the governor for my stock options at one point. But we were actually drinking at the time, or I was drinking at the time. I don't know that he was drinking, but there's no stock options in government, right? But people actually have a cause there. I mean, in fact, you guys are here. People that work in government really feel a lot of service-oriented. They really wanted to be there for whatever they were doing, like if they were working on Medicaid or if they were working on DMV or they were working even on cattle branding. People were very, very cause-oriented and very willing. But when you start to get like to medium-sized and larger companies, you start to lose that. Or at least that's what I've found. Is that you start to lose that cause. Like what, if you work for Cisco and you're like the 999 person, individual contributor down the line, what does that really mean to you to have a cause? It may mean something to John Chambers or their new CEO, but what does that really mean to me every day when I go to work? And I think what you wind up seeing is that as you start growing as a company or whatever entity that you're in, you start losing that willing piece. People just don't care anymore. They are making the donuts. There's that willing piece. They don't see the cause. They may know kind of at a high level, but they don't really get it. And I find that time and time again, and that'll kill you too. That will not allow you to deliver product every time. And so I'll tell you a couple of stories. When I worked at PaySimple, I joined that company, and they were about to go beta with their product, and they had white labeled their product. And so they actually had built their product. I had just joined them when they had actually released their first beta product into the world, and they were a payments engine. So for small businesses, so if you think about daycare centers or whatever, like a recurring payments engine for $25 a month, you go to a gym or whatever. And they could run, and I'm not making this up, 300 payments in 24 hours. I'm not making that up. I did not know that whenever I interviewed with them, by the way. And they were terribly broken, and I actually did, to go back to the able piece, I did actually wind up having to entirely redo my team. I had a consulting firm that they actually had outsourced to, and I fired them, and I actually hired a bunch of local people because I just couldn't get a grasp on why this is happening. Every day, it was 300 bugs, it was 500 bugs, it was 1,000 bugs, and we could deliver 300 payments in 24 hours. I mean, it was just the company was just going to go under. So I had this merry band of 7 developers who I had just brought in from the street, basically like, do you know .NET? And if they knew .NET, I would just hire them immediately. And they had no idea about payments or anything, and they literally didn't. And I just put this little band of guys together, and they were all guys, sorry. And I said, we've got to make this system better. We've got to kind of save the company. And they were like, we're all in. Yeah, let's do it. And then we signed American Express. And you can't make this up, let me tell you. And so now we had world-class SLAs that we had to deliver for, we could run 300 payments in 24 hours, and we had world-class SLAs that we had to deliver in about 9 months, I want to say. 9 months, I guess, seems to be something in my world. I don't know what that means. I've never had a baby. Maybe that's the world telling me something. I don't know. So we had, but they did not believe in that. I mean, they were basically, I would sit down with them and I'd be like, okay, we just signed American Express, and here's the SLAs that we have to meet. It's 5 nines and millions of transactions. What do you guys think? And they were literally like, you are just moving the deck chairs on the Titanic. They literally were horrified. And so I said, okay, you didn't sign up for this, and I know you didn't. So if you want to leave, tell me. I'll give you a week or whatever. I mean, think about it. And if you want to leave, then that's fine. But if you stay, we're going to do this. And every one of them stayed, every one of them. And we delivered those SLAs that first year to American Express. It was amazing. But it wasn't me, it was them. And they believed in the cause, and they were willing to do it. And they sacrificed a lot. I asked a lot of them, and I said at the end of it, I'll give you like an extra week of vacation. I mean, I didn't even give them like money or anything. And that's just not what they wanted. They wanted a cause. And what I found is that people they don't want to come to work and they don't want to make the donuts. They want to come to work and they want to believe in something. And at IQNavigator, I had a little bit of the same problem. I had the maintenance organization with all these guys, and they were kind of used to just coming to work, and you know, they'd come in and they'd not leave at 3 o'clock, and I mean, they just nobody really cared. And we literally turned it around because we gave them a cause. We said, look, we're going to stand up a new architecture because we want to move forward, we want to be more nimble. And by the time that we stood this architecture up, and we literally delivered it a few weeks ago, these guys were working. I was making them go home. I was like, you can't work the weekend anymore. You have to take some time off. Because they believed in the cause. They were not only willing, but they saw the cause, and they were all over it. And so you have to make sure that you have the willing and the able before you try to do any kind of product or service. Because without it, you won't succeed, right? People say you need people, but you need people willing and able. So now, to get something done, I talk about just-in-time big picture and removing barriers, and these are a little bit different than needing people. I think they're a little bit harder to understand. But when you want to get something done, you've got to give people a little bit of information and a little bit of strategic direction. Period. And it's kind of part of the cause, but it's not exactly the cause. And so just-in-time big picture, it provides just enough information and direction to create the cause. So let me ask you this, okay? So I'm going to ask you to get in your car, and I want you to drive, and you can drive one of 4 directions. You can drive north, south, east, or west. How many of you are going to get in your car and drive north? South? East? West? Okay, thank you. Now, I'm going to ask you to get in your car, and I'm going to ask you to drive to Canada. How many of you are going to go north? South? Any?
Sorry.
Yeah. Vegas, baby, exactly. Well, two things just happened that are very, very interesting, and at least in my perspective and what I've learned in my career. One is there were several of you in the room that, I mean, a lot of you actually kind of voted, and you were voting like, well, I'm going to get in my car and go north to go home, or I'm going to go to the bar, you know, wherever. And so you were kind of making it up in your head because I didn't really give you enough information, right? I gave you some direction, but I didn't give you enough information, so you made it up. And the rest of you didn't vote at all. You sat on your hands and you said, I don't know what the hell she's thinking right now, but I'm not going to do anything. And you find that in your company all the time. When people don't have enough direction and they don't have enough information, they will either make it up and do probably not what you want, or they won't do anything. And I see this time and time again. When I was working for in the state and for Medicaid, we had Obamacare came down, right? And there was, I mean, let me tell you, that was a cause, right? I mean, you had a date and you had to hit it. But we didn't have a lot of direction and we didn't have a lot of information from the federal government. And we made stuff up at times. I mean, we did. Because we had to. And guess what? It wasn't always right. And so we had to go back and redo it. But people will do that every time. And so you have to make sure that whenever you're giving people instruction for whatever you're trying to do, for whatever you're trying to accomplish, that you give them enough direction that they understand what you're, you know, where you want them to go. Now, if you go too deep for too long, you'll also piss them off, right? I mean, because now you're in my way and I can't get things done and you're micromanaging me. And that happens too, and we'll kind of talk about that at the end here. But that's a hugely important piece, and a lot of people forget that. They'll say, you know, why, you know, I just let them do their thing, right? You can't do that because people need to really understand what your goals are and what you're setting. And if you give them enough, then you can create the cause for them, and you can actually get them all running in the right direction. But without it, they'll just make it up. When I first joined IQNavigator, part of the problem, we talked about the able part, but part of the problem was also that there was just kind of a lack of direction from the business. And we had teams literally that were working on reporting. And I went to them and I sat with the developers and I was like, what does reporting mean? And they're like, well, today we think it's going to be blah. And I'm like, you don't really have, you don't really know what you're building? And they're like, well, the business doesn't really tell us much. We don't really talk to customers, And so I'm like, really? And they were working. They were working, but they didn't have any information on what they were trying to build. And so, consequently, we didn't get much done, right? And you need to really make sure that does it make sense to you or does it make sense to them? And I think you just have to make sure that when you're actually guiding, whether you're a leader in an organization, whether you own your own company, whether you're just starting out on a project, you just need to make sure that you're giving enough direction to people that they can really take that information in that direction and make something happen that you want to happen, not what they made up in their head, which they'll do, or they'll do nothing. So then removing barriers allows us to focus on the how. So I explained to you what happened at Pay Simple. And I'll give you also, a long time ago, I actually started talking about t-shirts. And I said, that should go on a t-shirt. So I have all these sayings in my head, which is a scary place, which you've probably already figured that out. But the answer is not no, it's how. I think that's a great t-shirt because that's what I always bring to my teams and say, it's not no. There's no here. The answer is actually how are we going to get something done? And what you get when you do that is you get innovation every time because people, okay, well, I can't say no, so I got to figure it out. And they'll figure out things that you didn't even know were possible. And I'll give you a couple stories. Pay Simple was another good story of, it wasn't possible for what we did. Literally, if you told me, I had one of the guys at Savis, who was our data center at the time, now CenturyLink. One of their VPs, that was our data center, and he took me to lunch after the year that we met the American Express SLAs, and he said, I need to buy you lunch. And I said, why? And he said, because I bet against you. I said, well, don't ever do that again. But you have to remove the barriers for your teams, and if you don't do that, it's super important, not only that you do it, but that they see you do it. Because people need to feel like you're going to allow them to be successful. And a lot of times, we don't really know what our people are doing. And I hate to say that, but a lot of times you don't know what your people are doing is my guess. And I know that in my past, there have been times, and even IQNavigator, even Pay Simple, was like, what do you do every day? I asked this guy, when I first joined IQNavigator, I sat him down and I said, what did you code yesterday? He was a Java developer. So he said, I didn't code anything. And I said, well, why didn't you code anything? That's your job. And he said, I was in meetings all day. And he said, you called some of them. And he was right. I had him in meetings all day. So, that was his barrier. He couldn't get anything done because, he was in meetings all day. So I stopped all meetings. I said, there's no more meetings. No more meetings at all. If you need to meet with somebody, you have to get up from your desk, you have to go talk to them, and then you have to be back in your desk within 10 minutes. Or I'm going to do something really bad to your car. I just got hit on Sunday, so car things are in my head. So if I walk around like this, I was stopped, and this girl plowed into me. But you have to know what are your people doing, and how do you remove barriers from anything that they're having to do. I had to do that with Medicaid because, to be quite honest, whenever we were trying to roll out Obamacare, we had a very strict timeline. As you guys know, it was just kind of these crazy timelines. The feds were changing their rules. We don't put that on camera because they'll come, fly over my house. But they were changing the rules a lot, and but the date wouldn't move. There was nothing that we could do about it, and yet we also had in Medicaid or the eligibility system in Colorado also has food stamps, and it has other eligibility systems. Then they needed stuff. They needed stuff really bad, but we had Obamacare, so I had to literally start fighting off everybody around me to say, this is what we have to do and deliver right now, and I'm really sorry you're not going to get this other stuff, but you're just going to have to wait. And it wasn't good, it wasn't fun, and nobody liked it, but it's what we had to do because I had to focus my team and say, I'm going to remove every barrier, I'm going to give you every chance for success right now, but you have to deliver for me. And they did, right? And if you do that for your team, if you remove the barriers and you also say the answer's not no, it's how, you can't say no, you have to say it's how, but you can tell me how, and you can tell me what I need to do for you, then we'll get it done. When I worked for Pay Simple, the team had, like my little merry band of 7 developers. We were literally running 300 transactions in 24 hours, and that was the #1 problem, right, for our beta program. And I went to our CEO and I said, I can't help you right now. You want me to deliver American Express, and I'm going to deliver all of it, but you have to give me some time to let these guys figure out what all is wrong and also stand up a world-class system for you. And it's not going to be fixed overnight. And he didn't like it. He didn't like that answer at all. Because we couldn't focus just on that problem. We had to focus on the problems, the bigger picture problems that we were able to deliver, but we wouldn't have been able to. And so it's hugely important. I think sometimes people forget, and especially when you get in your daily grind and you think, well, we just have to have this and we have to have that. But I don't want you to lose sight of the bigger picture. You just can't do that. And so you really do have to remove the barriers. And you have to be pretty stringent about it on your own to be able to tell your team, I got your back. And that's really what it means. But if you can do that, then I can promise you that team will go to bat for you every time. I've seen it time and time again. So remove the barriers. Now, in the first 90 days, I wanted to just kind of talk about this, and then I'm going to open it up for questions in case you guys have some. I want to give plenty of time for that. And I had a beer before, so I talked really fast. So in the first 90 days, so I wanted to just kind of go, in the first 90 days, you're going to be, it doesn't matter what you're doing right now, whether you're starting a company and it's the first 90 days, whether it's a new job, it's the first 90 days, whether you just have a new project the first 90 days. What are the things that you need to do in kind of the first 90 days to get back on track? Maybe you're just off track and you just need to start, kind of fresh. You need to dive deep. And diving deep means, first of all, pissing off a lot of people. And I've talked about it at length, but you got to know what people are doing, and you got to know almost to the individual contributor level of what are you doing, what did you code today? And I would never have known that I had a meeting problem, and it was my problem if I hadn't asked him, and he said, I didn't code anything yesterday. So when I was working for Medicaid, I went to Deloitte, and who was our consulting firm, and I was asking them, why aren't we delivering this? And they're like, first of all, they're like, you didn't ask. But then they're like, well, we have all these things that we're trying to deliver, hundreds and hundreds of things. And yet the system, literally, I went to one of the counties, and it stopped every day at 11 o'clock. Every day at 11 o'clock, it didn't work. And I went back and was like, well, that doesn't seem right. And it happened to be that they were running batch reporting, and I said, can you move that? And they said, well, yeah, we can do it at night. And I'm not, you can't make this up. But nobody'd ever asked. Nobody'd gone to the counties. I went to the counties, and I was like, I sat with this woman who literally, and if I hadn't been there at 11 o'clock, I wouldn't have even known that, right? And she's like running her mouse, and all of a sudden the mouse stops working. And I'm like, oh my God, what's wrong? And she goes, it's got to be 11 o'clock. And I take a break. Yeah. So, it was an easy fix. They literally fixed it that day. They fixed it that day. But I wound up having drinks with this guy from Deloitte whenever I left the state. And I said, I'm really going to miss you, and I was kind of getting teared up. And he said, we didn't like you very much. I said, really? I thought we were close friends. And he said, you questioned everything. And I said, well, I did, but it solved a lot of problems. And he said, it did, but we didn't like you very much at first. So he's a friend now. It's all good. question everything. Again, I mean, I would go, I mean, in any of my teams, you know, I would ask, you know, what is it that we're trying to do? Why are you doing it that way? And again, people don't like that a lot. I mean, they feel like that you're getting in their space. But you know, but you can do it in a nice, non-confrontational way. But you know, you need to question everything about what's going on in that first 90 days, because if you don't question it, then you're probably not going to get the results that you want. And if you don't question it and you're in trouble, then you're really not going to get the results that you want. So you just really, literally need to sit down. And I actually told our CEO at IQNavigator recently, we were having some problems in a different organization. I said they just need to go sit down with the individual contributors and just talk to them. That's what you need to do. And you got to disseminate all of the things that I'm talking about all the way through the organization so that the individual contributors know that you care, they know that you're going to ask, and you'll get real answers. I mean, they'll tell you. So question everything, and then bring calm. So this was kind of my final thought, and it is a funny story, and I'm bringing up a lot of my Medicaid stories, but whenever we were about to deliver, the Medicaid system was a client-server system, which, if that tells you anything. And so we were actually moving it to a web browser. Imagine that. And it had actually started before I joined the state, and they were kind of right in the middle of it. And so when I was there, we were about to deliver it to the counties, and it was going to be like a true browser, like you go online like everything else. And that was just a huge, big deal for the state of Colorado. Everybody was very aware of it. And so on the day that we were going to release, I very intelligently decided to fly to Washington, D.C., and to go to a conference. I was assured that it was all going to go very well. And so I was literally in D.C. I'm calling back. It's on a Sunday. And I was like, how's it going? And they're like, it's actually going really well. I said, that's great. And they're like, just enjoy, don't do anything. So on Monday morning, I'm at the conference, and about 8 a.m., I'm calling back, and they're like, yeah, it's all good, everything's good. About 9 a.m., when everybody got into the county system, all hell broke loose. And we basically took down the state network. And for about 2 days, for about 2 days. We didn't know what it was. We had no idea what we'd done wrong. I'm in D.C., not good, right? So I flew back, and I got everybody in a room. It was Deloitte, it was all the state people, and everybody was panicked, and you could hear the sheer panic. And it was actually Tuesday because I'd just flown back. I said, get everybody in a room, and everybody was there, and you could just sense the panic. People were like, I've never seen anybody be, they were yelling at each other. I mean, people were just panicked. They didn't know what was wrong, and it was really a bad scene. And I said, look, I'm not mad at you. I'm not even really upset with anything. It's just that we have a big problem, and we have to solve it. And I said, so I need everybody just to calm down and go back to your desk, and let's figure out what the problem was. And we solved it in a couple of days. I mean, it took a while, but people kind of got a little bit less edgy. And I'll give you another story. When I was at PaySimple, we actually we used email to bring on new clients. So if our email was down, we couldn't bring on new clients. And we were a startup, and that was the whole thing, was trying to bring on new clients. And so one day, in all of his infinite wisdom, my email guy decided to take down the email servers for maintenance, like about 9 a.m. And he couldn't get them back up, right? So not only did he destroy our ability to bring on new clients, but basically nobody could work at all. So the CEO's running down, and he's mad at me, and like, why the hell? I'm like, I know. So I watched this guy, and he was running around, and I could just see him. He was just panicking because he knew that he'd done bad. He knew he shouldn't have done it, and he, all whatever. And so it was about 3 hours later, and we were about to literally close the company down and send everybody home, and just like we're not working. There's nothing we can do. And I saw him sitting in the corner. He was at his desk, and he was just sitting there looking at his computer. And he wasn't working. He was just looking at his computer. And so I brought him in to my office, and I said, look, I'm not mad at you. I'm not going to fire you over this. CEO's mad, but he'll get over it too. I said, but I want you to just go out. You know what you did. Now go undo that. But don't worry about your house payment or the fact that your wife is pregnant or any of that. Don't worry about any of that. We'll talk about it whenever we're done, but I promise you nothing bad is going to happen. We'll get through this together. And he went back and he literally fixed it in 10 minutes. It had been down for seriously, I'm not kidding. Because he became so panicked. And what I found is that not only will people panic, but the teams will panic whenever things are changing and whenever there's like any kind of crisis. They'll panic to the point of they're worried about their paycheck, they're worried about their house payment, they're worried about their car payment, they're worried about everything but the problem. This guy was not worried about the email servers, I can tell you. And the Medicaid side of the house, these guys weren't worried about Medicaid either. They were worried about the contract that we had with the state. Was the state going to be mad? Were we going to be in the press? I mean, they were worried about all of these things, but they weren't worried about the situation at hand. So when you start diving deep and you start trying to figure out how to deploy product in a better manner, and you start getting in people's stuff, it worries them. And they do start worrying about themselves, and they'll worry about themselves long before they'll worry about you or the company. So as a leader in those first 90 days, you need to bring calm, like this is going to hurt just a little bit, but not for long. And bring that calm to people. And I can tell you, you'll get really stunning results if you do everything I tell you. So I am kind of done here. I wanted to open it up for questions. I hope that you learned something from my experiences, because if I haven't been able to bring you something, then I've gone through all of this pain for nothing. But I would love to you to ask some questions. Yes, sir.
I've led teams on very complex FDA-regulated software that took a year to develop.
Yep.
And we brought a level of impeccability to that in the team by having a pretty loose, it was accountable, but a pretty loose accountability system where people knew what they had to do, but we didn't put a thumb on them, and it was on time and on budget. And for a tiny fraction, less than 0.5%, and it's now a global system that the Army and 600 hospitals use. What happened with the thing of Obamacare? $240 million. And no, I'm a serious question. Where was the impeccability in the team?
Well, I can't answer that, and I don't want to. Well, and I don't want to. But I'll tell you what I will say about my time, not only in government, but government is kind of a really good spotlight on the problem. And what I see a lot of times is there's no oversight. And I see a lot of times with technical oversight, my pay simple problem was that they offshored it and they never looked at it. They never asked again. And so these guys, they didn't have a lot of direction, they didn't have a lot of information, they made stuff up. And I saw that in government a lot of times where people would just be like, well, we outsourced it to IBM. But you have to know what they're building, You see that all the time with highways, will we $20 million later or $50 million or $2 billion later, and nothing got accomplished because there really wasn't a lot of oversight. So I really don't know. I probably know more than I'm willing to share. But I do think that that's part of it. And there was a lot of, I saw that a lot of times in government. I mean, they would just literally outsource things and just hope for the best, and hope's not a strategy. So. But one thing that you did resonate is, and I think you hit on it, is kind of the willing and able piece. When people feel accountable and when they're at that cause, and you give them you don't have to worry about them. In fact, there was a time when my team at IQNavigator, I was worried okay, there's a huge bug and nobody's paying attention, and I'd literally be calling my VPs who's on point. And now I don't have to do that. If something happens, I've got developers falling all over each other trying to get to the problem. And it's really cool because now they feel that cause. I think that's a big part of it. So you must have had that. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so first a comment and then a question for you on the comm piece of it is huge, right?
Yes.
And there's science behind it that shows that a section of our prefrontal cortex shuts down when we're triggered, and it's the resourceful part of our brain.
Yeah.
So anytime we're in a triggered state, we can't be resourceful. So how do you personally keep yourself calm in this chaos?
How do I personally do it? So, beer, yes, beer helps. I think it's a great point. So I've often been told that I'm very calm, and I've been told that in every one of my companies that I've worked for, and I'm not. I'm telling you, and I mean I can tell you whenever they called me with the Medicaid problem, I mean I was not calm, but I didn't let on. Really, I mean, I've learned kind of a demeanor to just kind of, let people, because if you panic, everybody's going to panic. And so you just kind of have to learn that. But you're right, I mean, I call it the lizard brain. I mean, the lizard brain just kicks in. It's like, I got to get out of here, right? I think it's just training your brain.
How was your flight back from Washington?
It was awful. My flight back from Washington. It was the worst flight of my career. I can tell you that. Yes, sir. Hi, Christian.
How are you?
Good.
When you're dealing, I don't know if you have a strong lead technical background.
Yes, I do have a strong lead technical background.
Right, so for those of us who don't, right, but are building technology solutions, can you give any insight into how you can help who's full of shit?
Yeah, it's a really good, yeah.
Because everybody I get
to look at, even like this, my product now is nice, it's good.
Yeah.
But if somebody looks at it, they're like, oh man, I don't know why these guys did this, and I can build this different. In every case, you end up with this. And when you're a startup and you don't have a team of developers to deliberate with, you're sort of relying on that person as the expert lead on, a
Yeah.
vendor or whatever. So how do you? Is there a way that you can use to weed any of that stuff? Who's full of crap?
what the basis is for real confidence in your product.
Yeah, and I don't know if you guys heard him, but he's basically, yeah, I'm going to repeat the question. Yeah, sorry, I should have done that. So Christian asked if, how do you smell bullshit is really what you're asking. If you're not a technical person, how do you smell technical bullshit? And I'm sorry, I don't know how to, but you articulated it much better than I did. But I actually got right to the point. So, it is a problem. I mean, I do see that over time and time again with people who aren't technical. And there's a couple, because you had a couple of questions in there. One was, how do you know whether or not you built it correctly, and is it good? And then the other one was, why do people come in and say they want to do it differently? First of all, I would say that technology is super creative, and people don't really get that. So there's 100 million ways to skin the cat, and everybody that comes in and looks at your stuff is going to be able to skin the cat differently, and you just have to decide, is it good enough, right? So you kind of have to just go with that. But secondly, if you're having problems, if you're having scalability issues, or you're having some kind of deep technical problem, you need someone that you can trust. And I would say I do have a very deep technical background. I used to code. I was a software engineer for about 10 years before they promoted me out beyond my capabilities. So I get it, and so I can talk to developers. But you almost have to find someone that you trust, and it's just going to have to be a technical person, because without that, I've just seen that developers maybe even mean it. I mean, they really believe in what they're saying, but there's just, even in all of my career, like at PaySimple even, they wanted to rebuild everything. And I said, we don't have time, so we're going to have to do this and that. But I found people also that I trusted, but I also knew the technical stuff. So it is a fine line, and I think that you have to go with your gut a little bit, and then you just need to really find someone you trust. So sorry, and I'll go with the gentleman behind me. Sorry, I'll get you in a minute.
John McKay was the first coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They lost 26 straight games. Press conference after the game, the guy asked him, what do you think about team execution? He said, I'm in favor of it.
That's awesome.
The point is, in some sense, there's also a need for a clear understanding of consequences of failure.
Yeah.
Failure's okay. It's okay to make mistakes because you learn from them. But if you fail time after time after time, there are consequences.
And I don't know that you're asking a question, but there are consequences to failure. And I agree with you. I've actually, they called me the hammer at Pay Simple because, I wouldn't take no for an answer for anything. I've fired people before, but I don't ever fire someone for the wrong reasons. I fire them for the right reasons. There are times when the environment just isn't conducive to someone's skill set, and those people aren't necessarily in the right seats. And those are the people that probably need to exit the building. But then there are other people who are really trying, and they're on the brink of greatness. And I always I will help them be successful in any way that I can. And you just have to decide, is someone in the right seat. I have a one. I won't tell you what the role was because I don't want to embarrass anyone. But I had this gentleman who was totally in the wrong seat, very high visibility, actually in Colorado. And I moved him, and he was failing. And I moved him into a totally different role, totally different. And he was amazing. He did an amazing job. So, failure's okay. I don't ever worry about my team failing. In fact, when I was mentioning that we just installed the architecture a couple of weeks ago. We were supposed to install it in May. So we were late, right? But we did it, right? We wanted to do it in about 7 months. It took about 9 months. But for us, it was still a success because nobody even thought we could do it, right? So I'm okay with failure. Yes, sir.
Sherri, what do you think about how do we get more women into technology and entrepreneurship? Do you have any ideas on what we can do here?
Thank you. The question is, how do we get more women in technology? I actually just submitted something for a blog. I am asked to speak on panels about it. I don't know. I don't know why women aren't embracing it. I fell in love with it. I was a musician. In fact, I may write a book, honestly. But I was a musician for about 8 years, right after college. And whenever I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, and I loved the musical life, but I wasn't making any money. I was poor. And I thought, I probably need to do something with my life. And I discovered software engineering kind of in that very first wave where there was about 35% of women were going into it. And I fell in love with it, and I stuck with it. But most women first of all, don't stick with it. And secondly, we have about 26%. I've even heard as low as 18% coming into technology right now. The only thing I can say is I heard an interesting theory the other day, and it was Nancy Phillips from BioWest on a panel. If you guys know what BioWest is. But she said she came from a non-traditional family where she took out the trash. That was usually her brother's role, but she did it, and they just kind of had this non-traditional family. And I had a non-traditional family a little bit. I have an older sister, and I grew up on a farm with my dad. My dad and my mom, but my dad, and we would ride horses, and we would do all this kind of non-traditional stuff. And I don't know if there's something about that. I don't know, but I think that we have to get girls interested early. And if you think about it, 20 years ago, there weren't many women doctors, and now there are. So there's something there, but I just don't know. I think that we're encouraging. There's very much a groundswell now. So I think that we'll probably start getting better. But I think you just have to figure out what is it that we're missing. I loved it. I still love coding, and my team is like, please don't code, because I'm not good at it anymore. But I love it. It's great. I don't know why, and when you think about technology is in every company in the world, I can't even think of anything, in a third world country that doesn't use some kind of technology. Why aren't we 50%? I don't know. If I had that, I could probably retire to Fiji, maybe. I'm working on it. Yes, ma'am. Lynn, sorry.
Can you tell us a little bit more about IQNavigator, since you talked about the other?
Yeah. IQNavigator. So my current role. So I love IQNavigator. I know I've talked smack on my Java developers, and they're probably going to shoot. Well, they're dunking me tomorrow, so they can take their angst out on me. IQNavigator is actually a contingent workforce software as a service solution, and so we work with Global 2000, Fortune 500 companies that have a lot of contingent labor, so temporary labor. And if you Disney is one of our customers, and they have a lot of fairy godmothers. Who are not full-timers in summer and all that kind of stuff. ESPN is owned by Disney, and they have a lot of contingent laborers that work on sports events and those kind of things. And so we're basically a software as a service solution that helps onboard them and offboard them. They're a little higher risk because they are more temporary than like a full-time employee. So, and they don't want, these Global 2000 companies don't want those names in their HR system for federal regulation and some of, there's tax implications. And globally, there's a lot of laws around that. But what I do see, what we're trying to do is disrupt that space, because I see over the course of the next probably 5 years, that space is going to change dramatically. Because the millennials don't want to work in the same way that we've worked in our world. They don't necessarily want to be full-time people. They want to be project-based. They want to work how they want to work, where they want to work, and things like that. And then you've got the Ubers of the world that are really pushing the boundaries of what's a full-time employee and what does that really mean. I think the federal regulation here in the States is going to change. It'll be slow, right? I mean, because it's government, but there's a lot of activity in that area. And I'm on the Internet of Things Talent Consortium, which is actually it was started by Cisco, but we've got MIT and Rockwell and just a bunch of companies are in this consortium trying to figure out what's kind of the next talent that we'll need for the Internet of Things, because that's coming. It's it's going to be so big for everyone, and what we're coming to is it's going to be definitely skills based. So I'm not sure that it's going to be that interesting. It probably is still interesting that you're a doctor because that's a little bit different. But as a software engineer, let's say, I don't know that I need to know Java, or maybe I don't need to be a Java developer. I just need to have certain skill sets and attributes to come in and do a job. And so I don't think job descriptions and titles are going to be that important anymore. I think it's going to be what you can do and what project that you're able to do. And I think it's going to become really temporary. Just, like the jobs will become very temporary. Yeah. Yeah, it's very cool. I mean, I'm actually super excited about the space. If you can't tell, I mean, it's just very disruptible. And I'm excited because I think it's a really cool way to work, right? I mean, just imagine if, like for the next 6 months, I'm going to do this, and then I may take some time off, I think we'll see that. Any other quick? We're probably running out of time. I haven't looked. But I think we're right on time, Molly, which is great. Well, thank you guys very much. I appreciate your time and all that. Thanks. Oh, here. Do you want to?